I want to welcome Dr. Hu and Dr. Stark, and my name is Jesse Cifuentes. I work in the College of Graduate Studies, and we are going to discuss several questions, several topics regarding publication, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask and discuss, and we're here to help you, so let us know what you're thinking, and feel free to chime in anytime.
Am I the only person?
You're the only person?
Yeah, we have someone else.
This is being recorded, is that?
Yeah,
this
this
is recorded.
Okay.
Yes, it is recorded, so
By the
there
way,
are
this is an
online students.
informal, this presentation, something from.
And I guess the main topic that we're here today is to find out why it's important to publish. So I guess we'll start off with that, and if you want to introduce yourself, Dr. Hu, first.
Yeah, so my name is Xinping Hu, and I'm an associate professor of chemistry, and my study is mostly focusing on the chemical oceanography. I'm the physical environmental science faculty.
And I'm Mike Stark, associate professor in geospatial systems engineering, and my background is civil engineering, actually computer science, and I'm with the School of Engineering and Computing Science, and I work on geospatial type technologies and how they're applied for surveying and mapping. Coastal problems, agriculture, you name it, different ways to apply it.
Are you a doctoral student or?
Yeah, I'm a doctoral student. I'm in the CMSS program. So my advisor is Dr. Tajik Kishimoto.
Great.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll start off with the first question. Dr. Hu, why is it important to publish?
Well, to publish, I think for the students, if they want to publish, first of all, you have to figure out why you're publishing. So what is the reason? So you're writing something that can be added into the literature. It's kind of an addition to the knowledge base, for both the scientific community and also for the society. So that's the major goal of the publishing. So Dr. Stark may have something more insightful.
Yeah, so I think publication-wise, definitely the doctoral student is where it's biggest value. I mean, if you want to be faculty and you want to get jobs in faculty and you're a PhD student, which most PhD students do, or they want to have a research position, federal lab, et cetera, one of the number one things they look at right off the bat are publications. How many you have, quality of publications, where you've published. Even if you get your, you pass your dissertation and your committee approves it, the peer-reviewed publications is something external to your committee, and it's important to show that your research has been evaluated externally, and that's why it's of high value. Having said that, I also think it's good I always think it's great to publish, whether undergrad, master's student, or PhD, even if you're just going into industry, because that's something you can put on your resume and say, hey, look, it's a big accomplishment to show that your work has been novel, so it's been accepted by the scientific, the broader public. So I think there's value there as well, not only at the doctoral level, but definitely at the doctoral level where it becomes very, very important for students pursuing their PhD to get publications.
What are the steps that students need to take so you said earlier they need to decide why they want to publish. So what are the steps once they've decided why they want to publish that, what do they need to do while still a student, obviously?
Well, for the PhD student, typically, they're going to stay in the grad school for quite a few years. It varies depending on the progress and then the workload they are taking. So the steps, first of all, I think for the student is to, you have to set up a research goal. You have to have a goal, and then you start reading the relevant literature. Okay, so then from reading the literature and then through talking with the advisors, you should identify, in the literature what is missing. Okay, so that's actually what all the PhD student research should be novel. Okay, so for the novelty, you're going to have something new added into the knowledge base. So identify something new nobody has studied on, and then you move ahead. Well, you have to talk to your advisor and see whether the something new is something you can do within the limited period of time. So identify the unknown, and then you just have to, start from, depending on what you do still, and go to the research on the method, and then test the method, and then study the subject. You have to go through the entire thing before you really are able to publish anything. Well, that's for the research papers, but then there are another type of publications called review. So some students, they can just simply read the literature. Okay, so either you synthesize what's already in the literature, or you can, by reviewing the literature, you can find what is missing still, and that alone can also be a standalone publication. So actually, I sat on a committee for a marine biology PhD student earlier, and he actually had a chapter that is focusing on reclassify 57 different classes of algotoxin, and reclassify that into 55. And that alone, that's a huge paper, by it's double-spaced in his dissertation. That's including references. That's about 200 pages. So that's I just told him you can basically publish as this monograph, not only as a paper, but then they submit it to a journal, and hopefully it'll be accepted pretty soon.
And if a student approaches you, Dr. Stark, and he says, I want to publish, and is that usually how it happens? They have to approach you first, or do they have to join your team?
Well, so in my case, to be honest, I'm usually pushing the students. So some do, but a lot of times the advisor is really pushing it. But the way it works, as Dr. Hu mentioned, normally there's a research problem, and so they'll come in, and it's really the advisor that guides them for the most part, though there are some students that are very motivated, independent, and just they know what they want, and they want to do it, and they realize the value of publication. But generally, yeah, they come and you formulate a problem with them to work on that starts the basis for your dissertation research, and it starts to grow. And the key is, Dr. Hu mentioned, is that starting out, it's really the literature view, making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel. That's the number one thing I always say to my students. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't, and you see that sometimes you will see publications, almost similar things, different journals, but similar topics. But you want to, you're doing something novel, but you're also building on other work. So there's nothing like truly novel, in my opinion, that just comes out of the blue. It's always adding value to it. So it's that literature review is really critical, but you identify a problem, start to work on it, do your background research, see what areas you can tackle that's of interest to the student and their overall research goals. And then generally what happens is you get to a point where it's like, okay, this is good work, maybe you present it at a conference, or you feel like there's enough here that you say we should go for a publication. I try to encourage and push, as Dr. Hu does, to get them to publish, because it's really important for their careers and those things, and again, at the doctoral level. And so, that's trying to keep a time frame of the deadlines of when to write it and getting your first draft and those kind of things going. But it's a team effort. I mean, they're working on the problems. I'm kind of providing, or their advisors providing input. And then, you set a time frame and say, okay, well, let's start looking at getting this work published and go from there.
Sounds like the supervisor has an important role to play in all that.
Generally very important. And it doesn't have to be their main advisor. It could be somebody on the committee or et cetera in that area. But it's, it's important to be there. But again, some students are very just take it and go for it. Like, hey, I want to get this published. Provide me comments. Everybody varies. But it's important across the board. I think it's very important for the students at the graduate level to look towards publication.
So as a supervisor, how do you choose what journal is appropriate for a certain publication?
Right. So that's always a big challenge. So generally, what I do is depending on the type of student. So I have students in what's a field called geospatial computing, and then advise some students in coastal marine system science and the types of journals. Even though they might be working on similar type topics, the types of journals in life are different. Well, generally, one is of course level research and quality of the publication. So the ultimate goal is like Nature, which is considered the premier journal. So if you could say, hey, this is good enough to go to Nature, you go for it. But generally, you look at quality of the publication or the research and the level of journal you want to go at. Because that has some influence, especially at PhDs, on what they call the impact factor in the quality of the journal. But you look at that, and you look at the audience is the most important thing. I mean, who do you want to read? If you're doing a paper, for example, that's using say remote sensing or satellites to measure things, are you wanting people that are more on the processing of the data in that, or more on how that's being used to say for a scientific problem? So it's really important to target your audience and where you want this paper to go. If you're an algorithms person, a math person, you want it to go to these folks. If you're more on the broader scientific community or specific to say coastal or agriculture, then you want to target a journal more that way. And then from there you find one that, they usually list kind of areas that they emphasize, and you make sure your paper fits in there with the student. And again, in my case, at least for my students, I'll generally start them off on what I think is a decent journal, but not, depending on the type of work, not a really, really rigorous or hard one. Because they all vary in terms of level, but you do want to try to get a good quality journal that fits with the audience for your work. But the other factors are the time frame. Some journals take a long time to turn around, even though they're really good, and maybe the student, or you don't want to go through, you want to find something that's a little quicker, or if it's open access, is also journals that you can get your papers out to broader community. So there's other factors that dictate it, but I think in my case, the audience is the number one thing, identifying who you want to read that paper.
Yeah, I think one thing the students need to pay attention to, well, I think on the other hand, the advisor should have the ability to monitor. So there are more and more so-called predatory journals out there. So you have to be careful, because for those so-called journals, and they just get your money and they publish your things, but then nobody reads it.
Yes.
So, but again, as a student, probably even if you want to send it up there, and they typically require publication fee, and your advisor may not want to pay it, so you may not end up paying, publishing there. But that's something not only in the student stage, but then after you graduate, go to because I've seen even professors here. It's not necessarily the absolute predatory journal, but then still it's not the from the bigger publishers that are reputable.
Yeah, to follow along with that, I mean, I actually have recent experience. There's one in what they are book chapters, and they put together these kind of open source book chapters, and they sound really good in principle, but generally, so what happens is they want to charge you for that chapter. And generally, when you're doing a book chapter, I mean, you're doing a contribution to the book, and it shouldn't be charged. And so you look for little flags like that, and we see more and more of these things. There's actually, I forget, I was starting to read up on, okay, who are these folks, and where is this coming from? And then there's like a website that tracks what they call the predatory publishers that you can follow and things. But it is, and it's really getting to the open source world of getting things out there. But the good journals, though, that are open access like that, oftentimes will have a hard or charge more to publish, but it's often of value if you can afford it, because it does, again, get it out there to a wider audience. And there are plenty of really good journals for open access. So there's some different models coming out in the world of publishing, but that's a good point about identifying still the reputable ones is really important.
So it sounds like you have to be kind of proactive and at the same time kind of cautious, but at the same time, I'm sure there's some publishing steps. So once you've actually published, do you have to do anything else, or you just leave it and it does its own thing? Do you have to follow up? How does that work?
Well, for a paper that is accepted, you're gonna have to go through, correcting the proof, and then the journals will format it and put it into this formal final version. And then after that, you typically, nowadays there are platforms like ResearchGate and like Research ID, all type of platforms. You can put up your work there, and sometimes they can automatically find your papers. And then people may, if they don't have the access, it's not an open access paper, they may write for you and request the full text copy. And now, well, that ResearchGate doesn't allow people posting the post-production manuscript anymore. So that's, you try to, publishing paper definitely isn't the last step. You have to promote. If you think your work is meaningful and it helps other people to learn knowledge and then to explore more, you have to, I think it's better to promote in some way. There are also social media platforms. You can tag your paper to your funding agency or somebody that may be interested in the study. Okay, so that's from recently I gathered.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely marketing that publication, sharing it with people, getting it out there, because also what faculty looks at is how many people are citing your publications. That's really important, so how many citations you have, and you have a seminal, what they call a seminal paper, is a paper that gets cited a lot in a specific subject. So that's of huge value to get it out there to wider audiences, and those things, social media sites for research, like ResearchGate, is a good platform. You just have to be careful with when you're sharing a journal that is not open access,
Mhm.
which is why it's of value to pay for open access sometimes if it's a good journal with a good impact factor, because then you can put it on ResearchGate and there's no problems. Other ones allow you to do like the original submission before the final edits, or what they call the non-copy edit versions.
Yeah, preprint.
Yeah, and you can still get it out there, and there are ways to do it. That's the nice thing about now, is it's just much more open. When you submit a journal though, or a publication, when you submit it, it's a pretty rigorous process at that point. I mean, once you submit it, you have to go through rounds of revisions and things. And I have some slides up here. I don't know if you want to show that up real quick.
Would you like to look at the slides?
Well, let me just go through. So this is a whole presentation on from a former workshop like 5 or 6 years ago we had on the peer review process. But here's how it normally works. When you publish, you submit, and then it goes through an external review, typically 2 to 4 external reviewers. Depending on the journal, it could be a couple of months if you're lucky to, over a year and even longer.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be really careful with students that have deadlines and need to get up. So, and it depends on the quality. And they'll assess the merit, suitability, etc. And then what happens is you're going to then get back a set of comments. You usually have to address them and resubmit, and maybe it keeps going until finally, hopefully, they accept it for approval. So I think here's kind of a summary of the process, but I'll move here to what it looks like. So when you submit a journal, what happens is typically, if you're really ideal, this never happens to me, but maybe it happens to some, is they say, this is just beautiful, all the reviewers loved it, we're going to take it, no changes, no edits. That's pretty rare, at least for me. So that's like the ideal case. Generally, they have what they call accept without review, but they'll provide some suggestions. That's like still really good. Like, okay, hey, we suggest doing this, but they're happy with it that you don't really have to, but generally you would do it. That's still a really good case. This is more standard. You might get resubmit with minor corrections, where the reviewers will come back and say specific things about it, and that's still pretty good. I find this to be more standard, is resubmit with major edits, and really what those are things like maybe they want the organization, they want certain more analysis, certain things addressed, and so you'll go through that and address them. And then the worst case is reject outright. And sometimes this happens, it's not to discourage students at all, and it happens to me too, it's just you put it to the wrong journal, that's it. Sometimes you submit it and it wasn't the right audience, or they'll often the editor, before they even send it off to reviewers, an editor will look at, you'll submit a cover letter and say, okay, this is what my paper's about, and they'll kind of skim through it, and they generally kind of vet it and say, well, yeah, it looks acceptable, we'll send it on, or this maybe is a better fit for a different journal. And you go through the process, and for students, so this continues on with actually some examples of edits getting back. But the biggest thing with this is you got to be kind of thick-skinned with when they come back with comments. You can't let it discourage you. There are nice reviewers, there are hard reviewers. I get them. There can be, you just have to take it as help to improve your paper. And especially students starting out, like their first publication, I've seen some get very discouraged. They see these, like, what is this? These reviews from these reviewers coming back, these comments that are very tough and brutal, and but you just got to kind of say, okay, yeah, and you try to address each one. And what happens is you'll address them as best you can. You'll have a cover letter that you write back about how you addressed each comment. And so it's a fairly intensive, rigorous process, but addressing those comments and showing the reviewer that you took into consideration is really important. And sometimes you don't have to address them all. There are times where maybe you disagree, and if you do it, be respectful, and they can agree to it. But it's a process. Submit, get the comments back, make the revisions. Maybe they need some more changes, and hopefully you get published by then.
Well, during that process, so what's the big picture? Is there also so I see that there's a review process. Do you know what the reviewers are looking for during that time as well? Is there like a rubric that you follow?
So generally, what it is they'll have a list of reviewers. You can provide suggestions for reviewers that you can put out, and the journal can take it. But typically, journals will identify experts, fellow professors in the field, and other folks that are doctoral level and that have expertise in those areas. Again, you can suggest, and they often like that, suggest potential people to look at it and have expertise in it. You can even specify sometimes that somebody just doesn't like your papers and say, please avoid this person. They can choose to avoid that person. But what happens is generally it gets, and then depending on the journal, 2, 3 to 4 reviewers, they'll send it out. and they have a time frame, and there's not really, so the journals will have rankings of different things they have there, but it's really up to that expert, and they just try to go through and things that aren't clear, or problems with the science behind it, issues with results, or just things to help, like I said, with organization, writing, other things like that. So the journal will have sort of a metric of is this appropriate for the journal? 5 is really good, low is bad, novelty of the work, 3 is average, 5 is good, 0 bad. They have different things like that. And then they provide you just a big list of comments, and some can be as specific as a typo to general things on the methodology and things like that. And you get them and you have to address them there.
Yeah. For what we publish, typically, for the review when they came back, we see mostly in the beginning that's the summary, and then there's the overview. What are the major questions? Okay, and then followed by the more detailed comments. And I've got comments for like 20 pages long.
Yes.
So you're gonna have to address them point to point, like Dr. Stark said. You can respectfully disagree, but then you have to address them. Okay, and then let's see. So for that 20-page long comment, when I sent it back for the point-to-point responses, it was close to 40 pages. That's one round.
Yes.
It can be kind of burdensome, but then on the other hand, bear in mind reviewers, unless really like you run into some kind of anime, their objective is to help you improve. Otherwise, they can just tell the editor, because for the review, for almost all the papers I review, there's always a section, it's a secret message to the editor. You can always say whatever nasty thing if you think the paper is really bad. So that's on the other hand, if they provide the detailed review suggestions, that's based on good intention. So that the students need to keep in mind, really, that's not criticize the person that's behind the paper, but then the work itself.
So typically, is there any do's or don'ts during the submission process that you can provide us with?
So Dr. brought up a great point about oftentimes if all the reviewers sort of see a common theme of some issues they have, the editor will provide an introduction and explain, highlight this really needs to be addressed because all the reviewers have found some issues with this. But I think the number one thing is generally they are there to help you. I mean, they can be pretty blunt, and even we realize this is voluntary effort. Maybe it's late at night, myself even included when I'm reviewing. Just to the point, like, but you're there really to just try to strengthen the paper and if something's unclear, trying to find out what they did. Again, it's a process, and you're really trying to help the paper and make it a better paper for that journal. But I think the biggest thing in terms of advice is, one, don't get discouraged by the first round of reviews. If they said not reject, that's positive, honestly. That means you can get it published. And 2, be very respectful in the comments. Do not, no matter how bad that reviewer might be hammering your paper, just try to be as respectful as possible and say, good suggestion, or we respectfully disagree and this is why. That's really important, is do not let it get to you and put in some smart remark into your response to review. That is a definite surefire way to not help that paper get published. So.
Yeah, so right, and I think I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind. Go on.
Did you have any additional tips, like tips that we should or we should not be looking for?
Well, yeah, and for journals, you have to really look at the template, what the template asks for the format. Check on the format before you really prepare the manuscript. So you don't get, because the first round, before even the editor seeing the paper, the editorial assistant may check it. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to delay, especially for students, they're on tight deadline. So that can cause quite a few days of delay if the format isn't right. Yeah,
and I had some comments from this prior presentation, but one of the biggest things to me is, regardless of the content, a well-written article, meaning there's spelling's okay, there's not a ton of typos. That, even if it's the greatest science, if it's poorly written, there's just grammar issues everywhere, and you can tell like it was rushed, that really can set a reviewer off. So even just getting it proofread, working with your advisor. Everybody has different writing skills, but just at least watching the typos, the grammar, those things can really help a round of reviews. A decently written article can go a long ways. If it's it still has to be novel. I mean, they're always going to look at that. I mean, if it's reinventing the wheel, or it's not a novel contribution, 99% of the time that's going to, it's not worthy of peer-reviewed publication generally. But starting off, there's, at least for me, when I see something and it's could have been good work, but it's just, figure numbers are misled. I mean, just a bunch of stuff, and I'm not mean minor things. This is major issues that could have been fixed. Just getting that point and everything correct before you even submit it, making sure that all is okay, really helps out a lot. It goes a long way, to be honest.
I know you mentioned it earlier as well, you kind of a way of how you're finding your ideas, but let's say you already published your stuff, how do you find more ideas? How do you continue finding novel ideas?
Well, that's the great thing about research and science is generally the more you dig in, the more neat things pop up and interesting ideas come that you want to keep working on. So it never seems to be, to me, where it just reaches a point where it's a dead end. And that's kind of why you're in the field. You just like keep looking at it. So you work on a paper, and usually that's going to spawn a new idea or a new approach, or new techniques come about in the world of, say, data analysis or data analytics or something like that. That I would have worked really well for the stuff, for the data we had. And so generally those, that's kind of that just manifests. It's not. It seems like it's a continual things to look at and examine and search on. So that generally is not the problem. It's more about picking where to stop and saying this is good enough and ready for publication. And that's a tricky thing. That's really the student working with their advisor and kind of making a decision, because you can. One thing I see sometimes is some students coming in with wanting to have the best paper possible, and they can have that, and you want to have a good paper, but there's a point where you have to pick a stopping point. So, okay, this is good enough for me to get it published, and you can move on, and not trying to shoot for relativity right off the bat kind of thing. So learning how to figure out a stopping point that's good enough in your work, and then obviously the review process will tell you that as well. They might have think you stopped soon enough, and they'll let you know it, or they might have thought that you went too much, and this is too. I've had where there's way too much stuff in there. You need to get this out and focus it on this. So generally that comes out in the review process, and also working with your advisors on when to stop.
Thank you. Mr. Hu, do you have?
Yeah, and typically for a PhD student, I think by the time the student is able to publish, probably for the most part, the structure or the content of the dissertation is relatively determined. So probably within that framework, you just cannot go too far. You have to be realistic. There are only 4 or 5 years or 6 years of a PhD life in your entire life. So you don't want to spend 10 years in grad school. So.
You hope not.
Some do.
Some do, yeah.
Did you have any questions? I know we've been discussing.
Yeah, I do have some, but I want to, if this is the end, I want to give my questions at the end.
Yeah, you're welcome to. We can open up the discussion.
Also for me, this is my 3rd year here, so I have 1 publication already, but that is before I came here. So now I am writing my first manuscript, and it takes, for the research, it takes 3 years. So I want to know how to. I know a lot of people every year they can publish like 2, 3, or even more papers. So the first question is how to speed up, and the second question is that since I have started writing my manuscript, I think it's 2 or 3 months already, but I still struggling with the writing. Yeah, so any advice on the writing?
So what was your the first paper about, or was it written in English or?
Yes, it is written in English, but it is 2 different topics. So my first publication. So I am my research is focused on the current physical oceanography, so current air-sea interaction things. So my first publication is about the Indonesian through flow, so the current in the maritime continent.
Okay.
And now my my research here is about the air-sea interaction at the west coast of Australia. So I studied the variability of the current.
So your first paper it was published before you came here,
Yes.
right? And then this is new project you've been working on.
Yep.
Okay. And then how often do you discuss the progress with your advisor?
Well, we have a weekly meeting.
Okay. And this is mostly based on the simulation, right?
Yes.
The computer, simulation of the current and the physical calculations, right?
No, our weekly meeting, we discuss the papers I read, my research progress.
Okay. Yeah, so how to speed up? Really, I think then do you have a complete data to work with already, or you're you're doing a calculation, then on the other hand, on the other side you're still writing?
Well, the data.
Is the study itself, without writing, is the study part finished?
The data we use are already there, so it's either satellite data or numerical modeling data.
Okay.
So I use both of the data, and I also run my own modeling.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's one reason that slow my work. But I am not that kind of student that put things backward, so I always push myself. But my advisor, he won't push me so much.
Oh, he won't push you.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I want to seek advice from you. That is there anything?
So if he doesn't push you, then you push him.
Yeah.
So that would be one way, because really, sorry,
Well, so it's hard to say without knowing more of the details on your work and things like that, but I mean, one thing you can consider, because every field's different, right? I mean, fields that need a lot of data collection, it takes a longer time than say you're working on some kind of processing algorithm on imagery or something like that. But one possibility that you can look at is potentially, some of that work you mentioned, the modeling, so there are things called letters papers, which are short papers that may be a component of your work. You're working on this longer paper, but you might be able to take a small chunk of your work that's interesting and neat and just publish a short paper on just the aspects of that. Also, conference journal papers help, and they're peer reviewed. So there are other ways to build up shorter papers that can be parts of your work that maybe you've already done that you just haven't thought about publishing, that could be published. And then you still have your bigger full paper, that you're working on right now, it sounds like. But those are ways that you can build up some publications. Good peer-reviewed conference papers can go a long way sometimes into getting your work out there, and they're not as, they're just a component of your bigger work. So there are some ways to publish, with shorter versions of certain parts of your work that you could get out there if you want to get some of the work out there. And working with your advisor and maybe providing some suggestions in that regard can help. But letters papers are pretty useful if you have, because it sounds like you're doing a lot of interesting things from the satellite data to the modeling. That you'll have a paper that maybe addresses all these things, but there's probably some really novel and interesting things you've done just in these certain areas that could maybe make for a shorter, what we call letters paper. Those are usually 4 or 5 page papers, peer reviewed, can be very rigorous, but they're more focused on a certain aspect.
Have you decided, what journals you're targeting with this work?
Not yet.
Not yet. So to what percentage? You must have done the background, like introduction, and then method, data method, and then have you got into the results section yet?
Yes.
You have, and then what about discussion?
Yeah, I have an outline, but not too much detail.
And then what is the intended length of the manuscript? Including the text and figures in print. What are you looking at? Like 5, 6 page, or like up to 10 pages of the printout? You don't have so okay. So for Yeah, I think definitely working with advisor is important because I had a student that graduated this year. She constantly sent me whenever I cracked the paper to her, and then she would just send right back almost the same day or the second day. So we've gone up to she counted. I didn't. She counted. Her first paper took 50 rounds just to get it submitted to us. So yeah, so really, I think advisor is pretty important, and especially for cases, for other students, if the advisor appear to be pretty laid back, and you should be proactive, and really, kind of just get on the nerves, because if they got you guys into the program, they should be responsible. I'm not saying your advisor isn't responsible, but it's just different working styles. And I've seen professors that are really laid back. They don't really push the student, and also see some professors are really pushy, to the extent that student cannot bear the burden. It's best that you got somebody that's in between. It's not too pushy, but then not too laid back. But then if the advisor appear to be, if they have, I'm sure all professors are busy. They have their own project to work on. They have the report obligations, but then they should really spare a decent amount of time with the student, so that they can help the student to work professionally on their, at least this kind of build up your credentials.
Yeah, my advisor, he's really good. When I send him some of my work, he responds me very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So I think it's my problem.
No, well, I think for writing itself, for discussion, you really need to break up the ideas. You got your results, and what are the important points you have to think about. You cannot. This is not writing for leisure, like write something post on the blog about the life, or your think of the life and the nature. This is you should make this a very structured piece, especially for discussion. You have all your results, and what are you going to show the result? What do you want to, what kind of point you want to get across with the result? So separate, make plan for each part of the discussion, and separate the important point, then give a summary, then you're pretty much done. So I think, and it's better also, like what I told my students, it's better to try to, if you have a paper there, you try to add a little section every day, but you don't let it sit for 2 months, and when you go back again, you have to reread it. So if you really work on that, just be consistent, keep working on it, not necessarily every day, but then at least a week you should spend enough time with that work, so just to push it through, right? So exactly what kind of problem do you think you have, other than not getting it quickly?
Because you're at the end of your third year, or you're just starting your third year?
This is the start, I think, right?
Yeah.
You got in the 16th fall, right?
Yeah, 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd like to say I think your advisor must be really good, because he's meeting with you every week, which is,
Yeah,
believe
I
me, so the issue is you ain't gonna believe how busy
Yeah, we have a
faculty
weekly
get,
meeting
so that's
with
very,
Yeah.
that's excellent. So he's obviously very vested in your success, which is great, because that's hard to do when you're faculty, you just all the meetings and other things. It does help, keep them informed of your goals and coming to them. I guess one comment I'll make on Dr. Hu's excellent points, at least for me, when I advise a student, I like them to pick the journal out, narrow it down pretty much when they start drafting it, because they have templates that the journal's like. Not everybody, an outline is critical. You gotta have, I always see, let's get the outline off the bat. But everybody's different how they approach it, but I like to have my students kind of target the journal, because that helps you sort of draft it, and you know what they're looking for. And they say this is the format we want your submission in. So when you're drafting the paper, it often helps to have that, because you can draft it right away and what they're looking at. It's not a big deal to just draft the paper and then go, but that may help, at least with this paper, in terms of maybe speeding up the progress a little bit there. But going on your third year, if you can get it out the door in there, you'll be surprised once you get that first paper out, it starts to really can move rather rapidly. So You know, and again, everybody's cases are different. You can't judge somebody's research that maybe they got 3 out last year. Well, maybe they didn't have to wait on a bunch of data to do it. But anyhow, you may look at, you know, right at this point, trying to narrow down what journal you want to target, because it might help you draft that paper a little quicker in understanding the audience and that stuff.
Yeah, I think for a lot of students, it's mostly where you publish in the journals where you rate. So, you know, if you're familiar with the journals that you rate almost on a daily basis, then probably you would have a pretty good idea. Right? So, yeah, it just needs time and effort, right? So, you know, there are tips of improving efficiency, but then there's definitely no shortcut. You know, all the work has to be done by you, the writer.
In terms of writing, I have so first let me say that if you're writing in a non-native language, that's very impressive to me. Like, so I have a student, she's from Vietnam, but she started off in, you know, her writing's way, I mean, again, amazing that she's writing in the second, way beyond what I could do. I can speak Spanish a little bit, but terrible at writing. But anyways, it always impressed me. But anyhow, her writing in terms of getting it published was starting off pretty tough. But she started going to writing workshops. I don't know if you've been going, and she even got a personal writer helper, and it's really.
Where is the?
G.R.O.W. does have workshops.
Yeah, they
so
have
they're-
workshops available to graduate students.
And she even got a tutor that goes through now and helps read them, because I used to get so frustrated because of like correcting and editing things, you know, where I was like, at least get this done, and you know, and it was to a point where I was like, and so we found her some help, and she actually is getting tutoring, and she'll write a section of her paper, and this person doesn't know anything about the science or the content, but just her writing, and believe it or not, in about 2 years, her writing has improved tremendously. So that was really helpful in her case. So you may look into that, and there are here on campus, so there are workshops, but also there's even kind of tutoring available and things like that they can even read your paper and help in that writing. And again, writing is just practice. I mean, the more you do it, you get better at it. Again, kudos for doing it. If it's, you know, and writing in English, if it's not your native language, is amazing to me that students can do that. It's very hard to do. And then also when you write, sometimes it happens to me, I tend to be a perfectionist and try to rewrite one paragraph, and I'll sit there for like, I realize I've sat in this one sentence for like 3 hours, what am I doing? And you gotta step away and then just come back. And technical writing is very to the point. You know, it's not creative writing. You're not, you're trying to write to the point and go through, but it's practice. But writing workshops and getting a tutor can really help in that regard. I've seen it firsthand. The student's writing is, from when she first got here to now, is, you know, it has really improved tremendously. It's pretty amazing to me, honestly. And she really worked at it. I mean, she procured that person to help, and I've been seeing a difference. So just, you know, that's not the contents of it. It's just on expressing your thoughts and those things, and the grammar.
Yeah, and also I think reading the good papers also helps a lot. You know, you just cannot write something out of something empty, right? A vacuum. So if you read, I'm sure you read plenty, and then not only read what they talk about in science, but then how they write. But you know, but really for scientific writing is, you know, like what Dr. Stark said, is to the point, and as long as it's precise and simple, it doesn't have to be complicated. You know, sentence structure, you don't have to, you know, build a very long sentence. In fact, if the reviewers see a long sentence, they tend to ask you to break down. Okay. And another I found when I was in grad school, actually I was recommended by a professor, and there is a book, I think now it's a third or fourth version, edition, called Scientific English. It's written by Robert Day. It's Robert, and Day is D-A-Y is the author. You can check him on Amazon, and I found it to be very useful because you know, there are some very useful advices on how to structure sentences, you know, and for tenses and things like that. It's a kind of a thin book, and it's the writing style of the book is pretty interesting, you know, for fun basically. They give you good writing example and bad writing examples. So not only apply to the foreign students, and also for some, you know, native speakers, they can speak well, they can write creative writing very well, but then when it comes to writing a paper, then they may suck. So get a copy of the book if you can. I actually recommend to my students.
That's great.
Yeah. Let me see.
Yeah, and here's a prime example. This is actually one of my papers earlier on. I thought I was a very good writer. I like to creatively write. So this is an example of a reviewer that's not a gentle reviewer. But it came in and said very clearly, as Dr. Hu just mentioned, authors should avoid wordy paragraphs and try to replace lengthy description by including paper references. The style of this manuscript is more appropriate for a book chapter. So basically what it was is they were saying I had too much fluff and all this stuff trying to be real creative, and I had to go back and revise that paper. It's very to the point. But that could be an excellent resource. And also somewhere in here, where is it?
This is the old edition.
And so in this presentation, this is also following on Dr. Hu's recommendation. This is an essay, 1946 Orwell, Politics in the English Language. Many folks refer to this as a good source of how to write effectively, including technical writing. They have 6 writing tips. So this was something that I sourced back when this workshop went on. And it's just overall general writing, but you might find it kind of interesting in terms of some suggestions. But the resource that Dr. Hu mentioned sounds really good. So. But yeah, the point of that was that I'm a native speaker. I like to think I write well, and that reviewer tore my paper up because I was trying to write a novel, not a scientific paper, and went through and had to basically revise the whole thing. So yeah, one of the tips is organization, compact sentences, reduce the fluff. I mean, that's technical writing. So, but anyhow, practicing and those resources can really help. And you'll get better at it, trust me. I mean, I'm improving every day anyway. So.
Well, thank you. Did you have any other questions? No? Is there anything that we might have missed? I don't think we have any more questions. All right, and is there anything else you'd like to add? Or?
Well, just, all the grad students, if you're watching this, it's really important. You don't, especially if you're a PhD student, you want to get out here with peer-reviewed publications. It's very, very important to your career and high value. So it's worth the effort. It's a great achievement. It's not an easy process, but I think it's extremely important. And also at the master's level for graduate students. And we've had undergrads published, which is a great achievement. And it's actually helped them get very good jobs when they say, wow, you published a peer-reviewed paper in a technical field. It's been really valued for them just working in industry. So.
Yeah, so publish, and then as you publish, you just have increasing confidence. So, like getting a first job, getting a first paper out, it's exciting. And then later on, you may not feel less and less stressful, so to speak. Hopefully.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today, Dr. Hu and Dr. Stark.
Thank you for having us.
We appreciate it, and we know you guys are very busy, so we thank you. And I hope you can join us again another time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much.
Right.
Appreciate it.